Brought to you by Knights of Awakening. This is the Labyrinth, and I am your host, Charles McBride. In today's topic, we're going to be looking at modern mysticism a little bit. What is it? Why does it work? And how is it different from the more classical methods? So, Justin asked in the group, the KOA group that is, what would people want to see more of? What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? What can we do to improve? And of course, one of our listeners said, I'd like to see more on energy work or concepts like that. And it kind of hit me that we've done a lot of different shows on this with the Labyrinth. But what they're really saying is that we'd like to see more of the Labyrinth, and Charles hasn't done a show in a while. In a very real sense. You know, we are the energy work mysticism branch of the Knights of Awakening. You know, I do hit other topics once in a while, but I try to keep things related to mysticism in some way. And I've really kind of slacked on that because I've got a lot going on being a professional mystic. You do this all day long, you do it every day. Sometimes you don't get days off for months at a time if you're doing it right. And you really do kind of get worn down on thinking about it and talking about it, especially when you answer as many questions in private as I do. I kind of started the Labyrinth years back to answer questions so I wouldn't have to answer them again and again. And that has worked about 50-50. But seeing that people have an interest in it definitely causes me to want to speak on it more. So we're going to look at that. The title is Modern Mysticism. And the first thing I want to hit on is that modern mysticism is all about the idea of mind over matter. Modern mysticism stems from a lot of different things. A lot of it comes from things like Hermeticism, and a lot of it comes from more very modern, very new or new age ideas, which are inspired by older methods, especially things from the East, that have then been incorporated to methods and methodologies of the West. Traditional Western mysticism, well, how traditional are we going back? If we're going back like to the Golden Dawn and thereabouts, 100, 200, 300 years ago, even 500, 600 years ago, traditional mysticism is all about chanting and calling upon higher powers, things like God or the angels or what have you. It's almost always very Christian-centric or Abrahamic, and it is only considered not Christian by virtue of the fact that it is taking on some of that power, and it's often debated in biblical context as to whether or not you're being a good Christian if you're doing it, or if you're not. I'm not a Christian. Let me get this out there. I have not been a Christian since I was 19 or 20-ish, and realistically, I haven't been a Christian since I was probably 15 or 16 when I started kind of waking up to my own views on the world. I just wasn't ready to get rid of the name. Back then, at least. Now, I'm a Norseman. That is obvious. If you know me, if you've heard me, if you've seen me talk, this is who I am. It is a core part of what I do. And that's why I start this out with, what is traditional mysticism versus the modern. And it depends on how far back you go into tradition. You go back a few hundred years, a couple generations, realistically, of practitioners. And it really was focused on ritual and symbolism. The idea of intensity, focus, energy, and all of these other Eastern concepts slowly started working their way in, but they weren't a core. The modern mystic emphasizes the concept of mind over matter. We have held Hermeticism up to be the highest point of our understanding, and it's good. It's not perfect, but it's really, really darn good. So we take these Hermetic principles and the ideas found within them, and we focus on them. But then we tie it in with other things. And the other things we tie it in are a whole lot of pseudoscientific terms. And I say pseudoscientific because each of them has their own scientific background. Words like energy and vibration, flow and density, waves and synchronization. All of these are terms that are supposed to be used under normal circumstances with a purpose, with an idea, that they are used to quantify a solid measurable force, and we're applying them now to quantify a feeling an understanding of intuition and physical understanding of what we sense. Because everything we do through our physical senses. And I'm going to prove this to you real quick. Anyone who does any reading or writing on energy work or energy manipulation, they hit on a topic first of feeling energy. And it feels like this. It feels like a sensation in the gut. It feels like a pressure on the skin, a warmth or a cold, or like a vibrational force. Everybody gives these quantifiers because you experience nothing outside of physical senses. You may be using more than the 5 senses you were taught, because realistically there's like a dozen or 2 dozen different senses, including things like pressure, temperature, and spatial awareness. With all of those other senses, that is how you experience things. You have internal pressure sense, external pressure sense, pain, sensors. The spatial awareness, again, is a favorite one to bring up for me, because people don't realize that they use that with their mystical senses to understand external stimuli. All of that ties together, and we have to explain it, so we use terminology that inspires us to understand it, such as energy, vibration, flow, things like that. Pressure is another good one. Density is a favorite one of mine. So when people start talking about you've got to raise your vibrational state or lower your vibrational state, what they're really saying, your concept of this thing we are calling energy in this way. And the reason I say that is because too many people get into this and they go with all these energy terms, and then when they start learning the physics and the science of the world, they hang on to these terms and they disprove everything they've experienced to themselves because the word no longer works. We really and truly do need a set of words that are not rooted in a scientific concept to explain mysticism. And we have it to a degree. We don't use it. We have things like ki. Instead of calling energy, we could call it ki. And we can separate that into the physical ki and the mental ki, if you will. But realistically, we're going to use the pseudoscientific terms. That's part of modern mysticism. It's what we do. And all of this is an effort to understand the infinite. Because when we start tapping into this with our meditations, we look inward, we look outward, we go so far in that we go out. We get this little glimpse of the infinite, and we get this understanding of how vast the universe is, the infinite truth of energy, of reality. And energy is a good word for this, in this case, because it's referring to the concept of matter, energy, and the connections thereof, that all matter is energy and all energy is matter in an excited state. We start to really tap into that on a multidimensional, multiplanar level, and we have to express that understanding through words that make sense, even if those words are not perfectly accurate. So modern mysticism, a big part of it, is New Age terminology based on scientific terminology that is not wholly accurate, but is absolutely necessary for us to express what it is we're saying and what we're doing. This is something that is very different from classical mysticism. Classical mysticism was based on really trying to reach these states and these levels of understanding, things like trance states or shamanic journey states, without having words for it. So they never tell you what you're expecting to get to. They just give you a process that will get you there. Basically, it's like giving someone mantras and expecting them to find enlightenment if they say the mantra enough times, because it works. You hone the mind. You focus the will. We are in a society that is very dedicated to understanding itself. We want to understand ourselves and the way things work. So the result is that we make a very great effort on putting things in terms that allow us to say, oh, I understand that, instead of saying, oh, I understand the process of it, but no one can understand it. So I'm gonna break it to all of you. Nobody understands mysticism. Not me, not you, not your buddy down the street, not the guy who claims that he's the best at it, not the guy who claims he's the worst at it. Nobody understands it. But we know what it takes to do it. We know what it takes to tap into it, to work with it, to utilize it, and to experience it. And in that, we will use terms that have no place in it so that we can convey that understanding to you. We are attempting to wrap the infinite into a package that we can give you, and when you open it up, you get at least a glimpse of what we saw in our deepest meditations and our deepest understandings. That is all that terminology is, but yet it is very rooted in the modern mystical method. It is very focused on having a way of conveying this so that you get over the idea that you're sitting there doing something pointless. I really blame modern education methods for giving kids busy work, for slowing down the mystical process, because busy work teaches people that sometimes we have you do stuff because we just need you to do something and get out of our hair. Realistically, in magic, the busy work is not busy work. It's honing will and focus. And if they would ever tell kids that, we're having you sit down and do this coloring puzzle that serves no purpose right now because we want you to hone focus, kids might actually do it. They may actually learn. But that's on education, not mysticism, although maybe they intertwine a little bit. The modern mysticism is based on trying to understand the infinite and then harness that infinite. Our rituals, our ceremony are all very much filled now with ideas like energy and pressure and flow and ebb and vibration. And that's great. And that is so that you get over that part of you that sits there and is like, so, you want me to do the hokey pokey, right? Hokey pokey still works, so long as you can get over disbelief, and so long as you can commit yourself completely to doing it with every fiber of your being, which is what magic really is reaching out with every fiber of your being. We have pulled a lot from psionics and ESP and psychic research and psychic energy work and government programs to move into the modern mystical method. This is where you get into magic done without symbol. And we have really put an emphasis on that in the modern mysticism. And anyone who is truly diving into the mystical needs to dive into the paranormal and the psychic and the ESP areas of research. If you're not diving into those areas, your mysticism is probably going to lack, or it's going to be very dogmatic, and it's not going to account for variations or variables because you simply won't have a way of dealing with those. To give an example, two sides of a coin: Christian mysticism, Abrahamic mysticism, versus modern demonology. I say modern because classic demonology was Abrahamic demonology. Your modern demonologist will tell you that angels are not always good, that they are forces that should not be trusted because they are under the will of something else, that demons, being free-willed, are more easily and better to be trusted because while they may have their own agendas, you know that their agenda is their own and no one else's. That is modern demonology. Classic Abrahamic demonology will tell you that demons, because they have no real power to oversight them, nothing that can demand they be good or true or just in any capacity, can never be trusted, and therefore you should call upon a force that you know has restrictions, has these limitations, such as the angels or God, because they have given you a covenant of forms where they've told you they will do this in advance. This is how they work. The demons don't necessarily give you that. That's two sides of a coin. But if you operate in either of those classic understandings without having the psionics, the ESP, the energy work, if you will, the modern New Age mentality, or even classic systems that are being incorporated from these, like key energy work, or Taoism, or Taoist mysticism, if you don't pull from those things as well, then your understanding in this is going to be limited to those systems. And it's always going to either be demon good, angel bad, or demon bad, angel good. And you're going to approach every situation from that very limited perspective. And you will refuse to understand someone else's point of view. You'll be unable to work with them. And you'll gain nothing from interactions from someone who's on the other side of that. When you start looking at the why and the how, you start looking at both systems, And you start breaking it down into, oh, this is why they believe that. And if I'm going to use that method in that way, I need to come at it from that point of view. Otherwise, I'm setting myself up for failure because their point of view reinforces their use of the system in this way. So to give the example, you go into the Ars Goetia and you're very forcefully dealing with powers that are maybe above your pay grade. If you have not already gained an understanding of the infinite, they will be above your ability to handle if you don't use the system in place and have not already bought into the system to empower it. So you then go outside of the Ars Goetia into modern demonology, which pulls from the Ars Goetia, the descriptions and understandings of the beings, but approaches it from a more shamanic mentality of working alongside these beings, of working with them in a compassionate and friendly way. That's great, so long as you don't take a mentality from the Ars Goetia. If you approach it from this and then suddenly shift tracks into the Ars Goetic method, you will very quickly find that you've set yourself up for a fight. Just like if you go into the Ars Goetia and don't call upon the higher powers to aid you. These systems are laid out on both sides, an understanding of the infinite, of energy, of will, of intent, shows you why the systems work the way they do, and it allows you to work in any system, which is really the goal I think the modern mystic is after, without the limitation of the system. It allows you to pull from the system what you need and work with it in the way that is comfortable for you. That's going to be different for everyone. It's going to be different levels of validity for everyone. Modern mysticism, in many ways, starts to pull more from shamanism, especially the idea of the shamanic journey, higher and lower planes. It pulls heavily from Taoism, Buddhism, Eastern energy concepts of ki, and modern concepts of psionics, of energy, of ESP, of mind power, if you will. These are a lot of key words I've just mentioned. And if you're looking to grow in these areas, you need to be researching those. And I highly recommend that anyone looking to grow in traditional mysticism, who has a modern mind, meaning if you were born between 1920 and 2018, at the day of this recording, for those listening to this in the future, whatever date it is, pretend I said that instead of 2018. If you were born within that time frame, you have a mind that requires explanation of why things are in order to function. You are going to need a background in psychic energy and psychic phenomenon to do magic. I know that sounds so harsh, but if you follow the methods laid out, unless you are a person who accepts things just because you're told them from a source that's trusted, unless you have that kind of mind frame, you're going to need a background in these things. So start looking up things like ESP. Start looking up things like psychic energy and psychic phenomena. Look up things like shamanic journey, trance states, self-hypnosis, guided meditation. Understand why these things do. Look into psychology. Jungian archetypes are very good for understanding the self and how the self manifests through these things. And then realize that all of the terminology that you're getting, if it's got a scientific backing, is not meant to be taken in a scientific way, so that you don't get confused between vibrational states of the self and the fact that the table is technically vibrating at a rate that allows it to be dense, and you don't try to put your hand through the table and break your fingers day in and day out. Because you need to understand those differences too. And you will find that your mystical abilities quadruple, quintuple. If someone tells you that they understand mysticism, though, that they know the truth, they are definitely trying to get you to buy into their idea of the truth. That's something I strive not to do. I'm Norse. For me, the gods are high and powerful, and I am great and powerful, and I don't kneel to anything. And for you, maybe it doesn't work that way, because your mind processes differently. So you need that background in psychology to understand yourself, or at least a little bit of self-analysis under Jungian archetypes, to understand yourself and the way you see the world, so that you can then tap into it through those pseudoscientific concepts such as energy. Because where your focus goes, so does your power. So does your will and your intent. I'm hopeful that this little lecture does something for someone out there. That it provides something of an understanding as to the way things work and why. In the future, I want to get into some specifics a bit more. Anytime I have like what I call a comeback episode, I almost always talk about theory. Because what I see more than anything is dogmatism in the extreme. And generally it's the people that swear they're not dogmatic that are the most. They say things like, I'm not dogmatic, but the Hermetic principles are the universal truth. Well, no, then you are kind of dogmatic, and that's okay, just admit it. Or, I'm not dogmatic, but all demons should be dealt with in this way. Well, no, then you're dogmatic. And notice I didn't describe which way. I didn't go, modern demonology, nor did I go traditional Goetic Lesser Key of Solomon, or Enochian, or anything else. I just, left it very blank because both sides are extremely dogmatic. When you approach things from a very dogmatic point of view, your way is the absolute truth, and you know the truth. I'm telling you, if you think you know the truth, you've not tapped into the infinite. The one realization I can give you is once you tap into the infinite, you will understand that you don't. And in that, you will start to bring forth a bit of something else in you. And that is a part of what it means to be a Knight of Awakening. Because a Knight of Awakening helps others awaken something in themselves. What I want you to try to do also is to awaken the Knight within.